Thanks everybody. This is my first time doing a YouTube live. My name is Tim Grahl, for those that don't know me. I am the CEO of StoryGrid Universe, and I'm the publisher at StoryGrid Publishing. And so I wanted to start doing these live YouTubes just so that you can hear a little bit from me and be able to interact with me as well. So a lot of times when you hear from me, I'm either just kind of announcing something new, or it's the podcast where I'm hosting the podcast and just getting the shit beat out of me. So in this, I wanted to talk kind of about what we do here at StoryGrid, what we're trying to accomplish, my perspective on things, which is going to be, a little different than Sean and the others. And then also just be available to answer questions. So I've been in the publishing industry for over 12 years now. I spent a long time as a book marketing consultant, worked with a lot of best-selling authors, and launched dozens of New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling books, help authors build their websites, do publicity, promote their books. And then I've written 5 books of my own. So I have 2 books on book marketing. So the first is Your First 1,000 Copies, which the second edition came out a couple years ago through StoryGrid. And then I wrote a book called Book Launch Blueprint, which is both of those are about book marketing. So the first is about building a platform. The second is about how to launch a book. Then I wrote Running Down a Dream, which is a memoir, a business memoir about just kind of what I learned about myself as I built a business and tried to run down my own dream. Then I wrote The Threshing, and I did that on the podcast. Pretty much every word was mentioned on the podcast. That was my first novel, came out in 2019. And then I wrote a book for StoryGrid called The Writer's Common Language, which is an overview of the language that we use at StoryGrid and how you can use that to better communicate with other writers. And so today I want to talk specifically about Masterworks, but I'll get into that in a little bit. But just to, again, give you kind of an overview, our goal at StoryGrid is to help change the world through storytelling. So I believe stories are the foundation of everything. Stories are the foundation of all of the beliefs that we hold. They're the foundational way that we change our minds about things. They are the way that we think about ourselves. They're the way that we think about other people, the world, politics, religion. All of these things are stories. And so I believe that by learning the craft of storytelling, it helps you do 2 things. One is it helps you know bullshit when it comes across your table. So I remember when I was when this was like, I have this clear memory. So I grew up very strict Southern Baptist Christian world, and so I was at church, like, I don't know, all the time, at least 4 times a week. It was usually more. And there was this guy at church, and he was probably one of the most conservative people at the church. He was super conservative, but I always remember he always carried around a red pen in his breast pocket. And I remember talking to him one time. He was the dad of a good friend of mine, and we were talking. I was probably like 15, 14, something like that. And I was like, "Why do you always have a red pen?" He's like, he pulled it out. He's like, "So I can underline lies." I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, when I read the newspaper or I'm reading a book or, whatever I'm reading or whatever I'm paying attention to, I always remind myself that just because it's written down doesn't mean it's true, and I underline the lie. And that always kind of stuck with me of like, oh, like, it was that first realization of like, oh, people are lying to you and you have to pay attention. And so I think the better we become at storytelling, the better we understand the stories that are trying to be told to us. And I think that's really important. But of course, the main goal of StoryGrid is to help you level up your craft, right, and become a better storyteller. And that's what we've been working on since day one. So when I first reached out to Sean to talk about StoryGrid, because I read the book and I loved the book, it was to get his help teaching me how to become a better writer. I didn't think it would turn into anything more than one phone call at the beginning, and then it turned into the podcast, and I didn't think it'd turn into anything more than the podcast. So I want to just start doing these. I'm going to start doing these on a regular basis, just so that one, I'm available to you as like StoryGrid followers to answer any questions that you have. So I'm happy to talk about StoryGrid specific stuff. So um, anything around, what we're doing with the publishing house, what we're doing with the guild, what we're doing with the podcast, future plans, changes we made, why we made those changes. Anything around StoryGrid is up for grabs. Also, just anything around publishing. So again, I have this pretty unique perspective about publishing because I never worked like in publishing. I never worked in New York City for a publishing, a traditional publisher or anything. Um, I was a consultant that worked with authors to help them launch their books, but I got to see behind the scenes on all kinds of stuff. So I got to spend a lot of time talking to agents and publicists um, and I worked with authors that were indie published and traditionally published and hybrid published, and I've worked with authors that were like kind of famous, like Barbara Corcoran from the Shark Tank I worked with for the long time. A lot of well-known nonfiction authors I worked with, like Daniel Pink, Dan and Chip Heath, Dan Ariely. There's a point I think we had 4 clients whose first name was Dan, and it became really confusing at our consulting house. But Sally Hogshead, Pamela Slim, Hugh McLeod. I've got to hang out and spend a good amount of time with like Seth Godin, Gretchen Rubin, who wrote The Happiness Project. A lot of great authors on the nonfiction side. I spent a long time working with Hugh Howey. He's pretty famous indie author. He was one of the early indie authors to really blow up. In fact, I have his set right here of his Wool series, which is a fantastic kind of dystopian series that I highly recommend. Um, and he was really cool to work with for a long time. Really smart guy. And so by getting to work kind of in all these aspects, I saw a lot of what was going on in publishing, but I always saw it through the author's eyes, which I think was really important, because if you kind of come at it through publishing, I think you get a completely different perspective. So any questions around that, I'm happy to answer too. So I had some people submit questions ahead of time, and if you're here live, you can drop them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer those as well. I did want to talk a little bit about why we spend so much time studying Masterworks here. But before I do that, I'm going to grab some coffee. Hold on one second. All right. I think this is allowed on YouTube Live. All right. So, one of the things I thought was so interesting when I started working with Sean was how much time he spent looking at Masterworks, looking at individual titles. And over the years, this has just become like second nature to me. The first thing I want to do when I'm working on a new project is find other books that are like the one I'm working on. Books and movies. I think movies are a good fit here too. So for instance, right now I'm working on a project. It's only been the last 2 weeks. I'm about 15,000 words into it. It's one of the, um, yeah, caffeine is a writer's best friend, Susan. Yeah, it's one. So this book, I've hesitated talking about it because, as I'm sure many of you do, like I don't know, a dozen, 20, half written, quarter written, three-fourths written manuscripts on my hard drive that will never go anywhere. And so this one might be the same way. But I had this really unique experience um, driving to work. So I was driving to work, and I actually was driving my son to school, and he turned on the band 21 Pilots. And um, so we were listening to 21 Pilots on the way to school. I drop him off at school, and I usually have about a 25 minute drive from his school into my office. Well, the next song that came on after he got out was the 21 Pilots song, The Run and Go. And that song just destroys me every time I listen to it. So I'm listening to it, I start crying, and then as it's finishing, I like just kind of reach out to my phone and I just hit repeat, and I set that song on repeat. So it starts playing again, and I'm still like kind of emotional. And then the book started like, I felt like it was like downloading into my head. It was a really odd experience. Um, so for those of you, I've mentioned it here and there on the podcast. I think sometimes I forget, where I talk about this stuff. Um, but for those of you that don't know, a couple years ago, I started doing this form of therapy called EMDR. It's called eye eye movement something. I don't know. You can look it up. EMDR. Um, and my wife at the time was training to be a therapist. I think she had just finished school or was about to finish school, and or she might have even been in her internship at that point. And so I started this kind of therapy, and it's a totally different type of therapy than anything I had done before. So in the past, most therapy and most of what you see on like TV, or if you've done therapy, it's probably this kind of like, you sit there, you kind of tell your therapist your problems, they reflect it back to you. You kind of help you see things from a new perspective. You usually go home with a little bit of homework, right? Like this week, try to do this or try to do that. And this is super helpful stuff. I mean, it was life changing for me. I started going to therapy probably like 8 or 9 years ago, and so off and on I would go in for this kind of, it's called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of the basis for most talk therapy. Again, I know this because my wife went to school for it, and she teaches me along the way. So I'm going to come back to Masterworks, I promise. So anyway, um, I so then I kept kind of running. Yeah, thanks, John. Eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. That's what EMDR is called. And whenever you hear somebody describe it, it sounds very woo-woo, right? So most therapy sounds very it kind of makes sense, right? You sit there, you tell somebody your problems, saying something out loud, hearing yourself say it instead of just having it stuck in your head, having somebody reflect that back to you. That seems kind of normal. This is very strange. So the way that there's different ways to do it, but the way that I did it was you hold these. You hold it's and this part sounds like Scientology. So you hold these buzzers in your hand, and they buzz back and forth. Now the normal way EMDR works is the therapist will hold up fingers, and you put your eyes on the fingers, and they go back and forth like this, right? And you follow it with your eyes. The whole thing is you want your eyes moving back and forth like it does in uh, sleep when you're sleeping, right? So anyway, what it does is it drops you into trauma, and while you're down there, you kind of reprocess the way it's being stored in the body. I don't know how else to say other than that. And I think when they first started doing EMDR, that they were working with PTSD, war, veterans. And so they would basically take them back to that moment in time that was so terrifying to them, and then help them reprocess what happened. And when they would come out, um, it wouldn't be as activating to them. And so the way that my therapist did it is she started by we spent a few weeks just mapping out from the day I was born all the way to current, and basically trying to find every moment of trauma. And then we started at the beginning and worked our way forward. So we actually started with the day I was born. And you go into a memory. Now, obviously, I don't remember the day I was born, but when I say memory, it's more of like what's stored in the central nervous system that you feel, right? So what happened to me when we were doing these is um, I would start spinning up stories, go figure. And she said, this isn't normal. This isn't normally how people do EMDR, but I would kind of come up with these crazy, fantastical stories as a way to kind of like process what happened to me. And so over the summer, so I finished EMDR in June of 2021, so about a year and a half ago. And so over this past summer, I was just starting to have this feeling that I should write them down. And I kind of talked to Candace, my wife, about it. And she's like, yeah, you should write them down. And so I wrote a couple of them down, sent them to Sean, and he's like, this is the best stuff you've ever written. So I'm like, okay, well, that's good. And so the day that I was driving to work and I'm listening to the Run and Go, I start having this book download where I wanted to do a novelization of my EMDR experience where I drop into these stories. And so there's going to be like a framing story that's in reality, and then there's these fantastical stories. And so so I drove to work, I'm crying the whole way to work, and this book's just kind of like downloading into my head. I'm like, okay, I'm thinking through, what's the beginning, what's the end, what's the middle, what's the genre. Like I'm like kind of forming all of this in my head. And I get to work, and then I call Sean because we had to talk about something else. And I was like, hey man, this happened to me this morning. I kind of laid it out. And he's like, look man, he's like, the worst thing you'll do is learn something. So just, start writing it. So that was a Friday. So that weekend I was like, okay, I need Masterworks for this. That's the first thing that came to mind. Is I need a masterwork. I need something that will give me some kind of insight into how these types of stories are told. So the two that came to mind first are The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, and the movie Big Fish, the Tim Burton movie Big Fish. So both of them start in reality and have a fantastical element to it that the characters drop into. And so I watched the movie, took notes, then I started reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I just read the first couple scenes, and then I referenced. What else did I reference? I felt like there was another one I referenced. I can't remember now. Oh, and the other one is that was kind of in my head is the movie The Family Man, the Nick Cage movie, Family Man. Family Man. So we watch it every Christmas, and I remember. I think it might have been the first year I was doing the podcast with Sean. I watched The Family Man, and when he goes from the regular world into the new world, I paused it, and it was right at 25% into the movie. I'm like, oh man, that's so cool. So then I keep playing, and then it gets to the point where he flips from resisting the new world to leaning into the new world, making that transition. I pause it. It's right at the middle of the movie. And then when he goes back to the regular world is right at 75% of the movie. I mean, it's fucking crazy. And so it's kind of has a special place in my heart because it was the first time I saw what Sean was trying to teach me clearly in a movie. And it has that fantastical element world. So I was thinking about that. And one of the things about Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Big Fish, and I swear there's another one, is that you drop into the extraordinary world right away. Now it's usually just a quick introduction, but the author, the writer, tries to drop you into that fantastical world right away. I'm like, all right, that's how I'm going to start it. So the first scene I write in my book, I drop right into one of the opening EMDR moments basically, and I tell that, and then I come out of it and I write the next scene. I'm like, all right, how do I get back in there? So I just read a couple more chapters or a couple more scenes in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, think back to Big Fish. I'm like, all right, and I figure that out. And then I'm doing this walking through. And so this is why I think it's so important that we study Masterworks, is that they become your roadmap to understanding what you're trying to do. And they're the thing you should go back and check in order to get yourself unstuck. And I mean, we've done this ad nauseum. I've got, these are all masterwork guides right here by StoryGrid. And then of course, if you've been following the podcast at all, we've been using the short story Eyewitness as our masterwork guide. And it just, every time you spend time studying it, I've done entire story grid spreadsheets of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I did a spreadsheet of the movie Die Hard. And like every time you do it, I actually referenced the Die Hard spreadsheet the other day because I was trying to think of something about Die Hard, and I was able to go into my spreadsheet and find what I was looking for. And so, um, and I think it's important, like, obviously we're writers. We should be reading all the time, reading widely, reading deeply. But then there's this different eye we bring to things when we're looking at it as a masterwork, and we're looking at it as like, this is the type of book that I'm trying to write. I'm trying to write my own version of this book. And the other metaphor I use all the time when we talk about masterworks at Story Grid is this idea that, you know, when they're training to, I think it's the FBI is training new people to spot counterfeit money. They spend very little time studying counterfeits, and they spend most of their time studying the real thing. Because the more that you study the real thing, the more you're able to spot counterfeits. And so that's why we always go back to Masterworks. We always go back to the great writers, the great books that have stood the test of time. Um, and that have touched lots and lots of people. And we want to see how the authors solve those problems because it'll inspire us on how to solve our own problems. So, yeah. So anyway, it's been a really interesting thing writing this book. Again, I'm almost done with the beginning hook. I'll probably finish that up tomorrow. And I actually went over with Sean yesterday. I was like, hey, like, when do you want to see something? Should I send you the beginning hook and you can tell me if I'm on the right path? And he started asking me some questions, and pretty much he was like, yeah, just keep going. It sounds like you've got it handled. So he's like, just keep going, keep your pace, and just write the whole thing, and then we'll talk about it. And I'm like, it's fucking terrifying because it's like the last two manuscripts he like immediately threw away. And I'm you know as fun as that is, I don't want to experience it again. So anyway, yeah, I promised to answer some questions. So if you're here live with me, feel free to drop your questions into the chat. I have it set where you have to be a subscriber on the channel to chat. So if you're having trouble chatting, just subscribe and then you'll be able to chat. All right. All right. So, in your opinion, what is the best route for publishing an unknown author? Uh, should they go self-publish or traditional publish? So, uh, my view on publishing is I'm pretty agnostic about it. Like I don't think everybody should do one thing or the other. Like I don't have a strong belief on this stuff. I don't think everybody should try to publish with us. That would be a mistake for a lot of people. Um, so here's the problem I have with this discussion the way it's normally had. So normally when we're discussing where to go in this publishing realm, especially if somebody's considering trying to get their book traditionally published, it causes this kind of like desperation, right? All right, I'm going to pause for some coffee. Yeah, they kind of come at it with this idea of a desperation of like, "Ah, if I could just get a publisher, if I could just get a publisher." And so they will basically jump at anything that comes along, that is the huge mistake. So the mistake is forgetting that you have created something of value, right? So the example I would use is something like I own a Prius, right? It's a 2016 Prius. It's currently not in great shape because I got in a wreck, but that will be fixed shortly. But it's worth something, right? We can all agree it's worth something, right? So when it comes time to sell it, when it comes time, if I want to switch to a new car, I won't like go out on the street and just go to anybody and be like, will you give me anything for this car? Just give me anything and I'll give you the car, right? And they're like, all right, I got $5, thank God, and just give my car and I get my $5. It's like, no, that's crazy, right? Because the Prius is worth more than $5. But this is the way that people sell their manuscripts, is they just walk around with it in their hand like wild-eyed, like, I'll take anything, I'll take anything, just tell me it's good enough to publish, right? And this is especially the way people approach traditional publishing and approach agents and editors and all this kind of stuff, is just like desperate, right? And my thing is, like, you created something of value. It has a value on it. Therefore, whatever you do, you should get an equal or more value in return. Okay? So, the other thing, so when you're thinking about signing with a publisher, you have to understand, like, you need to get something in return. In most cases, here's what you get in return: a decent cover design, some light editing, and extremely mild distribution, to say the least, especially if you're not a well-known author. So you basically, they invest what you could probably do yourself for, let's shoot super high and say $15,000. And now they own the license to the print, paperback, and audiobook for your book forever, basically. And what did you get in return? You got about $15,000 worth of work. And guess what? All of the marketing is still on you. Like, all of it. Because here's how the marketing meetings go at traditional publishers. They sit down and they split all the books into 3 lists: A list, B list, C list. All right. A list are books they've spent $1 million or more acquiring. Okay, so unless you get an advance of over $1 million, you're not an A list. All right. B list is anybody $500,000 to $1 million. Okay, that in advance, so they've invested that much money up front, 500,000 to $1 million. Everything under $500,000 is C list. Okay. Now, they take 90% of their resources, money, time, effort, energy, their team's time, all of that. They invest 90% of it into tier A, the other 10% into tier B, and tier C is completely on their own. That is the bowl of spaghetti they're throwing against the wall, and if something sticks, they might invest some more money into it. But if your book doesn't immediately start selling in the first week, you just get thrown away and they move on to the next thing. Okay? And you can talk about why that is and the morals of that and the economics behind it. And I don't really care about any of that. All I care about is the reality of that's how it works. So to me, if you are not able to generate enough interest in your book to get a really big advance, you should probably indie publish, because then at least you have full control. The other thing is, you make your royalties through a traditional publisher is just like... is just pittance. It's just pittance. It's like, it depends on 100 different things, but it's somewhere between 15 and 25%. So where your royalties self-publishing your ebook on Amazon is 70%. And you can do whatever you want. So if you want to give away copies of your book, if you want to run discounts on your book, you have full control over that indie publishing. But at the same time, with indie publishing, you're basically starting your own business. So I can go either way. My thing is, just make sure you know what you're getting into, and make sure you understand that you have something of value and you need to get something in return for that. And when you indie publish, people pay for your book. That's what you get in return. All right. Graybeard says, are the spreadsheets you're talking about available online somewhere? I'd love to dive into those, especially Die Hard. Yeah, here, I think I can share that really quick. Now, okay, I have to put a caveat here, because I did this years ago, and when I actually went back through the movie, and like, I watched the movie with my kids because they were finally old enough to watch it, and then I went through my spreadsheet, and there's little bits where I'm like, oh, nothing shifted here in my spreadsheet, like no value shifted, and then I'm like, yes, it did, like it. So I didn't fix it. So it's an old spreadsheet. There's stuff that's wrong with it, but I'll post it here in the chat. There's the Die Hard one. And I think I can pull up the Harry Potter one really quick. Hang on. All right, here we go. Yep. And here's my Harry Potter and Sorcerer's Stone one. And again, did this years ago. It is I would probably be appalled that I'm sharing these if I actually looked at them. Is there a list of masterworks in the StoryGrid universe for all genres? No. It's on the long list of content we need to create. Probably the best thing to do is we put up articles on the website for all the different genres. So if you go to just storygrid.com and just click the article for scroll down a little bit, there's an article for genres, and then you look at all the content genres and you click on those, and we give examples of masterworks for each one, but it's usually only one or two, and some of them are movies, but that would probably be the best way to start. The biggest thing is like, what are your favorite books in the genre that you've read, right? So that's always it. What's the one, we always tell people like, hey, if you could take any book and put your name on it as like you wrote that book, what book would that be, right? And that's an indicator to you that that book spoke to you and it's really important, and that would be a good place to start. So like one on my short list is The Name of the Wind, by Carlos something. I always forget the name of the author. The Name of the Wind. Wait, no, that's the Patrick Rothfuss book. That's not what I'm talking about. The Shadow of the Wind, I think. Yeah, The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. Yeah, so Alex says, I usually break Masterworks down into acts. However, I've noticed in recent article videos that the act level is gone replaced by quadrant. I'm curious if there's an important reason for that. Yeah, so on any of this story grid, like if we start getting into the methodologies and tools, I'm going to give my perspective, but I'm not Sean. I do not have Sean's understanding. I don't have Danielle and Leslie's understanding of this stuff. So I just will kind of give you my own take on it. So one of the things we do, and I'm going to do a StoryGrid live or a YouTube live on this in the future, is we get people bitch at us all the time about the way that they say we overcomplicate things by being really specific with our word choice, right? The one that probably gets the most blowback is we use avatar instead of character. Now, there's a really important reason we do this, and I've actually been doing this for years when I teach book marketing, is I always start by defining the terms, right? So one of the things I do in almost every live training for book marketing is I start by just putting a definition of marketing from dictionary.com. And it makes no sense, right? It's in English, but it doesn't actually help you understand what marketing is, just like most technical definitions of things. And then if like I asked 10 different authors what book marketing is, 5 of them would give 5 different answers, and then 5 of them would probably end up saying, I don't know, right? So I give my definition of marketing. When I say the word marketing, this is what I mean. It means create long-lasting connections with people and then be relentlessly helpful and add value to their lives. That's marketing. So anytime I'm talking about marketing, that's what I'm talking about. That way, 100% of the people that that are on this call with me now understand what I mean when I say marketing. So we get really specific with defining terms because it's soft out there, right? Like, just genre is my favorite example. It's like people are like, well, what about the young adult genre? I'm like, that's not a fucking genre. Like that's not, that is a marketing genre, right? Like that, but now we're using the word genre for different things. Is it the content of the book? Is it where it goes on the shelf at Barnes and Noble? Like, what does it mean? And we have a really specific um, definition of what genre is, and we're doing the same thing for Avatar. Because anyway, I said I would talk about this on a future episode, so I'll wait. Yes, there's a really specific reason we use the word quadrant instead of act. One is act is a soft word that doesn't mean anything anymore because you have 3-act structure, 7-act structure, and people are like, well, this was an act. No, that's an act. And it's like, it doesn't mean anything because everybody says different things. We are talking every story has 4 quadrants, has a beginning hook, middle build 1, middle build 2, ending payoff. And usually it's about 25% of the book each, and certain things have to happen at each of those points in the story. And certain things happen at all 3 planes of perception, right? So on the surface, above the surface, beyond the surface, things have to happen at each one of those points. So yeah, we don't use act, we use quadrant, and it is for a really specific reason. What are some common areas of the grid that low quality stories are missing? Um, this this is kind of like a question of like, what are common things about counterfeit money? It's like, well, most of it's just done so badly. There's lots and lots of different things wrong. Um, so what we have found. So I'll talk about really everything, right? So if it's a low quality, so most stories are low quality, including my own, right? So, this is not judgment at all. But and once you get into that low quality realm, it could be anything. It could be like there's no clear antagonist. It could be they're missing an all is lost moment. It could be the line by line writing is horrible. And what we found story grid is even if you get the macro stuff right, it's really hard to get that micro line by line writing um, going the right way. And we've learned that like we really want the writer focused on. I'm sorry, hold on. We really want the writer focused on that specific line by line writing and working with an editor for the macro view. Obviously everybody needs to know both, but that's basically what it is. So what we found is not being able to write a compelling sentence that builds to a compelling trope that builds to a compelling scene. This is why we're spending months and months and months just trying to get me to rewrite one short story that's roughly 1,500 words. All right, let me look at some questions that were submitted ahead of time. Frustrated by my getting stuck in my works in progress. I feel like I always need a bit more research than I currently have before I could write more. When do I know I've done all I can in the research phase and I've reached a point where words flow? Words flow from me easily and effortlessly. So I was actually thinking about this yesterday because I watched this YouTube video that Ryan Holiday put out. That's basically where he recorded over a 2-year period him writing and finishing his newest book, the book on discipline. And it showed like his whole process and kind of what he went through writing it and stuff. And I just thought it was so interesting because for years I wanted to write like Ryan Holiday. So he does this whole thing with like reading books and turning them into note cards. And so I was like, I'm going to do that, And so I tried to do it and I just hated it. It made me just hate reading. It made me actually stop reading books because I didn't want to have to turn them into note cards. And so I stopped doing that. And then at one point I was like, okay, I got to learn how to like structure stuff like Ryan Holiday. So I actually bought, I think it was Ego is the Enemy. I bought it on Kindle. I have software that pulls the digital rights management, the DRM, off of Kindle files. Pulled that off, converted it to a Word document, printed out the first the introduction, the first chapter, went through, analyzed it, similar to how we would analyze stuff with StoryGrid, like, whatever, and then tried to use that as a map to write my own book. And it was like some of the worst writing I'd ever done. And I finally came to this conclusion. This is deep here, guys. You ready? I'm not Ryan Holiday, and I don't like writing like Ryan Holiday, and I will never write like Ryan Holiday. Now, obviously, Ryan Holiday does a great job. His books are fantastic. They sell really well. He has a really great following. He's changed a lot of people's lives with his writing. But again, I'm not Ryan Holiday. And so what I found is any specific advice about how much research should I before I start? How, when will I think the idea that it's going to ever come effortlessly, just from all the writers I know, like I've never heard a writer describe their writing as effortless. um, so I think that's, you're never going to get there. But yeah, I think, like, you've just there you have to find your own way, and you have to, what I do is, I listen to other people and what they do. I kind of try it on, and I always think about, I used to like feel like, I had to be able to do it the way that people I respected did it. Otherwise, I was kind of a loser, right? And now when I hear about new stuff that, something that somebody's doing that I want to try, I think about it like trying on clothes, right? At the store, right? It's like I'm just gonna try it on. If it doesn't fit, I'm just gonna put it back on the hanger and put it back. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. That doesn't mean I'm never going to succeed at anything. That doesn't mean I'm never going to write anything that matters. It just means this particular thing didn't fit me. I just try it long enough to see whether or not it fits. If it fits, I keep it. If it doesn't fit, I don't keep it. So that is like, so when it comes to research, one is I don't really research stuff anymore. You know, my goal for everything I write in the future is to just be narrative driven. I want the story first. And so when I need to know something to tell the next part of my story, I will go research just enough so I can tell that part of the story. And then if I ever need to go back and fact check something, I'll go back and fact check it later or have somebody do that for me. But my thing, I'm always focused on the narrative. I just want to get the story down, and then we can worry about fact checking something later. But you know what I'm saying is, I probably can't tell you too much to help you. Uh, Graybeard says, yeah, he threw away his book. It was a hard thing to do. He rewrote it, but it's been much more successful since he launched it. That's great. Like, yeah, I don't know how many words Sean has thrown away of mine now. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Um, and I just try to, one of the things, at StoryGrid, we don't, we're not focused on the marketplace. We're not focused on churning out books. We don't, if you're an author that wants to just like churn out a new book every 2 months to like, get the Amazon algorithm working for you or whatever, it's like, I'm not like morally opposed to that. It's just not what we do here. We're focused on leveling up our craft as a writer. And my goal in life is that the last thing I write before I die is the best thing that I ever wrote. That's all I'm focused on, is I constantly have to be getting better. And whenever I finally kick the bucket, whatever I wrote last was the best thing I ever wrote. And so that's all I'm worried about here. And so I'll throw everything away. I'll keep working. I will, I haven't, my novel came out in 2019. It's now, nearing the end of 2022, and this EMDR novel may go somewhere, but he may look at it and be like, this is nowhere near good enough, and we throw it away. And, I have just decided, like, I trust Sean, and when he says it's ready, it's ready. If he says I still have work to do, I just keep working. Um, Yeah, I have. Jim says, "Have you read the book The Gap by Ben Hardy? In the book, it talks about the danger of comparing your current level of performance against ideals." Yeah, there's also this famous quote from Ira Glass from This American Life about like when you start trying to do something creative and your taste is better than your ability. Um, yeah, I don't think it's that. I don't think it's that. I think it's more of trying to shoehorn yourself into something that doesn't fit you. That's more of what I was talking about. And this is where you just have to build up the wisdom of knowing the difference. There are times where you're legitimately trying to get good at something and you're just not good enough yet and you got to keep striving. And then there's times where you're trying to shoehorn yourself into something that's just not you. And that's more of what I was talking about with me like trying to write like Ryan Holiday. Is it's like if I can't research like Ryan Holiday, if I can't structure chapters the way Ryan Holiday does, if I can't do any of the pieces, none of them, all of them constantly feel like I'm trying on clothes that don't fit, then guess what? It doesn't fit for me. It says nothing about Ryan Holiday's writing, and it says nothing about my writing either. Um, yeah, Jim says, is there a way to take the best of Masterworks without getting demoralized that your own work is not quite there yet? Yeah, I think the demoralization is a good part of the process. So when I was reading The Name of the Wind, not The Name of the Wind, The Shadow of the Wind, the one by Carlos Razon, like his descriptions of things are so beautiful in so few words. Like uh, I was on his third book, and he described a sunset, and in like one sentence, it was like this description of a sunset that was perfect and something I would never come up with. And I thought I could write about sunsets for the next 100 years and never come up with something as beautiful as what he just wrote down. And so there's like this despair in that makes me want to get back to writing to keep leveling up my craft. So like I think it's both. I think it's like one is um I heard this years ago and it kind of bothered me when I heard it, and um the longer I spend getting good at one thing. So writing, I've been doing jujitsu for almost 6 years now. Um, I've been running businesses for 15 or 16 years now. So these things that I want to get really good at, but it takes a long time. Is like I heard somebody say once, I think it was about writing, like if you can quit, you should. And if you think about that, it's like I've thought about that with writing of like why don't like you know nobody's waiting on my next book. Like it would mean nothing for me to quit. And we've even talked about like um this was on the podcast a few weeks ago about like should we keep doing the podcast in its current format? We could always switch it to something else. I could kind of fade to the background and I never have to write a fucking thing ever again. I don't have to go through the constant like putting my writing out to the 5,000 plus listeners on the podcast and like getting ripped apart live by people. I mean, I could get around all of that. Um, but I can't seem to stop. And so therefore I keep going. So I feel like those two things work hand in hand, which is I'm constantly kind of demoralized by what I'm creating. I also have these moments where I look at what I've written and it's gotten better, and that means I'm making progress. Um, and I also just try to. I remember um, I heard a pastor talking once about like the difference between effort and earning, and he's like, our job is to put in the effort. It's God's job to sort out who earns what, you know? And I mean, this shows up in, the Bhagavad Gita. This shows up in all kinds of places where like you have a right to your labor, but not the results of your labor or the fruits of your labor. And I think about that a lot with the writing is my job is to put the labor in, and I can't get too caught up in what comes out the other end. And I just keep doing my thing, showing up, doing my work, and the demoralization is a part of the process. It's part of what makes me sad sometimes. It's part of what spurs me on sometimes. Um, yeah, it's just part of the process. I think just getting like, and maybe this is just because I have to deal with it week in and week out with the podcast. I mean, I get super demoralized on the podcast sometimes because it's like, Jesus fucking Christ, like how many iterations of this eyewitness scene do I have to write before they will tell me it's good enough, you know? Um, and it's really hard and it's not very fun. And I write something knowing they're going to just pick the shit out of it. But at the same time, every week I get new insights. I learn something new. You know, it's just like, it's just part of the process. Um, all right. Whoop, 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 whoop. All right. On the opposite side, what are some particular additions that great stories have but average stories are missing? For instance, not every song has a bridge, but a bridge makes a song more epic. Probably the thing that stands out to me right now is the double factor problem. We've been talking a lot about this in the guild and on the podcast. Um, and it's the way I am currently understanding this, and you know, I would probably, you know, I'm probably getting this wrong. But the way I'm currently understanding these double factor problems is I want to address something in my story that goes deeper than the surface story, right? So, um, okay, this is probably a horrible example, but it's top of mind because I was just talking with Danielle about the movie The Replacements with Keanu Reeves, right? And there's this um, I won't go into the movie, but at the end, Keanu just says this one line. He's like, "Oh, I'm gonna fuck it up," but it's like he says, you know, chicks dig scars, you know, and glory lasts forever. And there's like this one moment where this kind of surface movie just drops into this deeper place of why would we do this thing that nobody cares about and nobody's going to remember? And he answers why you would do that. And so there's like a story that just stays at the surface, um, can work, right? But these stories that talk to a deeper part of ourselves and that teach something and address something that isn't ever a clear, like, this is the way it should always be done, right? Um, you know, the most recent example is the interview I did with Scott Mann and Randall Searles about the book Operation Pineapple Express, where the book is asking the question, what is a promise? What is a promise worth to you, and how far would you go to keep one? Like that's a double factor problem that you could write dozens or hundreds of books on, and they would all speak to people because like I've wrestled with this. So I'm coming up on my 20-year anniversary. December 14th is my 20-year anniversary. I got married at little baby face 21 years old. My wedding picture is right behind my head there. And, you know, side note, my son was in my office a couple months ago and he looked at that picture. He goes, "Mom looks the same and you look old." And I'm like, "Thanks, man." Um, that feels great. So anyway, you know, you reach this point, and you know, when I got married, I was like strict, you know, conservative Christian religious. You know, once married, always married. You know, there's, you know, basically never a reason you should get divorced. And um, you know, I left my religion, I don't know, like 6, 7 years ago, and you know, deconstructed and all that kind of stuff, and my wife did too. And then we went through this season on our marriage where I'm like, am I still living by a promise I made when I was 21 years old? Like 21 years old. Like, am I still bound by that promise? is that the only reason I'm in this marriage, right? And I had to like decide what I believed about myself and about our marriage and about all kinds of other things, because everything else I believed when I was 21 was gone. Why do I still believe in that? Right? And so it's like this question of what is a promise and how far will you go to keep one is like something we all struggle with. And so the best stories don't just speak at this like surface level of like, and great stories stand the test of time like this. Like go back and read the original James Bond books. They're great, they're fun books, but they're not asking deep questions, right? Um, and I think the best books are these books that speak to this deeper level. I think they change your mind. This is why stories are so important, is they change your mind at a level that nothing else can. They're like, this is why when I talk to fiction authors about marketing, they're like, well, I don't really offer value the way nonfiction does. I'm not helping people lose weight or make money or whatever. I'm like, that's not true, you know? Yeah, I don't go to church anymore. RC Mogo. Yeah, it's been a minute since I've been to church. Um, let's see. Yeah, yeah, here we go. John found it from The Replacement. Uh, Pain heals, chicks dig scars, glory lasts forever. Yeah, that's what whenever my sons get like a cut or a scrape when they were growing up, I would tell them chicks dig scars. Uh, how do you feel overall about the Masterworks singing experiment on the podcast this many weeks in? I haven't listened to the latest episode, but I feel your last iteration was really coming together. Um, yeah. Um, so what you're seeing is actually the third or fourth time we've done this. So we started doing this in the summer of 2021, so last year, um, iterating through scenes with me. And then the first time we picked a Masterworks scene was the first scene of Beat the Reaper. And we just kind of, I think they just kind of stumbled on the idea of like, look, he's really stuck. What if we just gave him a scene to look at and said, hey, write something like that? And then I started iterating through that, and it took me, many weeks to get it done. And then I had written something really cool. And then that's when we did the thing of like, I wrote it as if I was telling a story to my friends in the bar. They approved that. And then I rewrote the scene as if I was telling it to a priest, what happened. And then I rewrote the scene as if I was telling it to my like 8-year-old daughter, right? So that started locking me into like these different ways of telling the same story. So recently I've been getting frustrated with Eyewitness, but this happened every time where like I would start kind of losing. I don't know if I'm back. Whoa, I'm definitely blown out if I'm back. Can y'all hear me? There we go. I fixed that. Yeah, okay, I'm back. I don't know what happened there. So, um, the way I think about these oh man, I've been going an hour. I'm gonna wrap it up here in a few minutes here. But so if you have any questions you want me to cover, drop them in, and I've got probably another 15 minutes. So the way I think about these masterworks, me working on these things, is it's skill acquisition. Okay, so um, it's like taking some time off. Like let's say you wanted to be an expert like woodworker, right? And so you're always kind of tinkering on something, right? So every weekend you're out in your shed and you're like building something new, and it's like yeah, it's good. And I'm getting better, and all of that stuff. And then a like world-class woodworker approaches you, and he's like, "Look, here's what I want you to do. I want you to come work with me for 3 months or 6 months. You're not going to build anything new. You're not going to build anything that you want to put in your house. You're not going to build any gifts. You're not going to build anything you can sell. We're just going to go tool by tool, and I'm going to show you how to use it in lots of different ways, right?" And it's super frustrating because you're sitting there like using let's say what's the what's the like a sander or something. A sander is not a good example. Like I'm thinking of the chisel, right? So you're using a chisel, and you start to work with the chisel. And he's like, no, 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 you're doing it wrong. Stop. Try it this way. And I'm like, okay, so I try it that way. He's like, no, 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 stop. Try it. You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong because of all these reasons. Try it this way. And I'm like, okay, fine. And I do it again. Nope, nope, stop. You're doing it wrong. And it's like, it would be super frustrating. I would want to punch the guy in the face. But guess what? I will know how to use a chisel when it's over, and I'll know how to use it the right way, and I'll probably know how to use it 100 different ways the right way. So that's how I look at these things. Is it's not the goal is not for me to write some perfect iteration of the scene, right? So we get this feedback sometimes. Hey, I thought your scene was pretty good. It was like close to it, da 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 da. And I'm like, but that's not the point. I don't actually care about the end result. I care about the skills I'm building as I go along. And so that's why I keep showing up, keep showing up, keep showing up. Um, yeah. Did StoryGrid help with my deconstruction process? No, I don't think they're too tied together because I was already on that path by that point. The deconstruction process is like that's a whole nother story. Um, I've actually tried to figure out where it started, and um, I think the seeds of it were there from the very beginning. Um, but I remember the moment it happened, um, because my dad's still Christian, and he still is very not happy that I'm not a Christian anymore and don't really have any place for God in my life. And I think he sees it as like I made this decision to step away. And that is not how it felt. How it felt was like, imagine your whole life people told you there's the only swans that exist are white swans. In your whole life, every time you saw a swan, you saw white swans. So you believed it. You're like, everybody tells me there's only white swans. All I see around me is white swans. And then one day you're like walking by a lake and there's a black swan. Now what? Do you keep believing that there's only white swans? Like I feel like that would be an impossible thing to ask of you. And that is the way it felt. Letting go of like all of my religious beliefs was like literally I was driving home one day. I was listening to a book called The Lies We Believe About God, by I forgot the author's name. He wrote The Shack. And I don't even remember what part of the book I was listening to, but I had this moment where I was like, holy shit, I don't think I believe any of this anymore. And I basically pulled up a trash can to the table and just like raked all of my beliefs in and just started over and started building up from zero. Um, and so, yeah, it's been an interesting ride. Uh, all right, uh, let me just check. Uh, Yeah, I had a couple questions that were really specific to like StoryGrid methodology, and unless one really strikes my fancy, I'm not going to get too deep into those because um, I'm not good at answering them, and you have to remember when it comes to the StoryGrid methodology, I'm very selfish, right? So Sean and Leslie and Danielle's goal is to constantly expand and deepen their understanding of story to help all storytellers tell more stories. And then my role as like CEO, operations guy at StoryGrid is to like run the business behind all of that. But when I'm a writer, I want to learn it in a way that will help me become a better writer. I do not care about teaching it. I don't teach it. I don't want to understand it to the level that I could stand up in front of a room and teach the StoryGrid methodology. That is not why I came to it as a writer, wanting to become a better writer, and that has not changed. That is still how I approach it. I want to learn StoryGrid so that I can become a better writer, not so I can understand it to the point that I can teach other people. That's other people's jobs. Um, yeah, you know, Michael asked about our plans to expand into script writing. Um, we do. I mean, we want to. We want to like. I've been saying lately. For me to accomplish everything I want to accomplish with StoryGrid, like building out everything, it's probably going to take me about 120 years. So I'm probably not going to get to all of it. So script writing's on the list. We want to do stuff for children. We want to do stuff for high schoolers. We want to change the way script writing's done, songwriting is done. We want to change all of this stuff and apply StoryGrid in all of those cases. But we just have to move at the pace that we're currently going, and I'm always wanting to go faster. We're getting more done now than ever before, and all I see is all this stuff we still need to do. um yeah, all right, so I'll end it there. We're like 10 minutes after the hour, so yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I'm probably going to do some more of these. Once I kind of get my feet under me, I'll probably like set a schedule and start doing these. So um, again, I just want to make myself available to share what we're doing at StoryGrid, answer questions, be as helpful as I can. Yeah, so make sure, as always, like I say at the end of every podcast, like tell your friends about StoryGrid, subscribe to our channel, subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the newsletter. That's how you keep up with what we're doing. But otherwise, thanks everybody. It was great to have you, and I'll see you next time I do one of these. Have a great rest of your day.